As a preacher, you're kind of always nervous about the day that you come up to preach and your note-taking device, whether it be an iPad or a phone or whatever, is out of battery. And I just checked my iPad and it was at 2%. So I was opening it up on my phone. So that's what, if you guys are thinking I was texting over there, well, technically I did send a couple texts, but I'm just kidding. But no, I got it on my phone. We're good. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Scheduled this a few weeks ago, a few months ago, and I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. We have, if you guys can turn to Mark chapter 14, I'll appreciate a message from there tonight. Mark chapter number 14. Brother John told me you guys usually get out around 9:30 or so. So I'm just kidding. But we won't be long. As Henry VIII told his sixth wife, I promise I will not keep you long. So don't worry about it.
That's right.
All right, Mark chapter number 14. We're going to read tonight from basically my favorite story in the whole Bible. Of course, for every Christian, your favorite story should be the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and that is. But besides that, this is my favorite story in all of the Bible, and it's a story that, if you look at it from an American perspective, it doesn't really seem to make that much sense. It doesn't seem that there's much significance to it. But as we'll see tonight, there is a lot of significance. There is a lot of power in this passage, and there's a reason why God had it recorded 3 times in the scriptures. It's in Matthew chapter number 26, it's in Mark 14, it's also in John chapter number 12. And so the passage we'll focus on tonight is Mark chapter 14. We're going to start in verse number 3. It says, "And being in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat," he being Jesus, "as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious. And she brake the box and poured it on his head. And there were some that had indignation within themselves, and said, Why was this waste of the ointment made? For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence, and have been given to the poor. And they murmured against her, and Jesus said, Let her alone. Why trouble ye her? She hath wrought a good work on me. For ye have the poor with you always, and whensoever ye will, ye may do them good, but me ye have not always. She hath done what she could. She is come beforehand to anoint my body to the burying." Let's have a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity to come to your house tonight. And I thank you for the opportunity to open up your word. I pray that you use me, Lord. I pray that you flow through me. And I pray that you will just feed your people with something from your word. I pray that it won't be me speaking, but I pray that it will be the Holy Spirit speaking through me. I do pray that you will be with those mourning the loss of their loved ones from the 9/11 attacks. I just pray that you will just comfort them during this difficult day. I thank you so much for the country we live in and the freedom that we have. And I thank you for just the liberties that we have that I often take it for granted, such as being able to come to a church on a Wednesday or a Sunday. And I thank you for that, Lord. And I thank you, Lord, for every one of those lives that were precious to you. And Lord, help us as a country to reflect on that and to reflect on you and to come back to you. And as someone mentioned as a prayer request earlier on, Lord, that you'd help us to have revival in this church and in our country. Lord, we love you. I pray that you meet with us tonight. It's in your name we pray. Amen. In 2014, there was a man in Kansas who woke up in his bedroom to find that his house was on fire. And so obviously he scrambled out of bed and scrambled out of his house, out of his room, and went through the living room and scrambled onto the porch, onto his front porch, and made it safely out of the house. And then when he realized that he had made it safely out, he quickly ran back in to get something that he had forgotten. So he ran back into through the porch and into the living room and went back up to his bedroom and grabbed his thing that he had forgotten, and then scrambled back outside of the house and suffered from smoke inhalation in the process of this heroic act. But he had made it back to the porch, made it safely outside with his Xbox securely in his hand. And he risked his life and suffered smoke inhalation. I think he even actually had to go to the hospital for that. But he had to make sure that he had his Xbox and that he wasn't going to let that go to waste. And I know it's kind of a silly story, but a lot of times I know especially myself and my wife can attest to this, sometimes we place things that aren't important at a level that they shouldn't be. Sometimes we value things too much that really don't matter. And I think of myself personally, I think of my high school days, and I think of my fandom, if you will, how big of a fan I was and still am of the 49ers, all right? And you don't need to laugh at him. We've got a Raider fan back there, so you can laugh at him, because last time they've done anything, it was, it's never happened in my lifetime, so that's good. But thank you for agreeing, appreciate it. Do we have any other 49er fans in the house?
No.
Thank you. Even if you were lying, this is the time when lying is okay. I know we're in the house of God, but it's okay. It's okay. Appreciate that. You're a blessing. That was awesome. So, but I was a big, huge fan of the 49ers, and everyone at my school knew I was a 49er fan because that was how I identified myself. And I remember I lived in Southern California. I'm from Lancaster, California, and don't ever go there. It's not worth coming. It's pretty boring. And there's heat like here, but not as hot. But there's nothing to do, so it's not worth coming. If you want to come visit the church, that's different. But I'm from Lancaster, and so being in Southern California, we never got to see the Niner games on TV because our team was always bad, and we're 3-13 or whatever, and they never televised our games. I know you guys have suffered from the same problem. I'm sorry, I know you can feel with me. But I never got to watch Niner games on TV, so I remember I was going to go to college, and I was going to go in the Bay Area so that when I went there, I was going to be able to watch the Niner games on TV because I was going to be in 49er territory. So I was super excited about that. And I remember we were driving to the dorms. Mom was going to drop me off, and we went a couple days early. We were going to drop, I was going to go into the dorms the next day, and we settled in our hotel, and we were going to go out and get something to eat for dinner. So we had a hotel in Oakland, and we were going to go through the Bay Bridge into San Francisco to get dinner in the city. And so halfway through the Bay Bridge, which you guys, some of you may know, is not the most fun bridge to travel through because of crazy traffic a lot of times, usually. But halfway through the bridge, I realized I'm going to miss my first opportunity to watch a Niner game on TV. I know it's a preseason game, but still, I need to watch that. And so halfway through the bridge, I realized I need to get back to the hotel so I can watch my Niner game. And so I made my mom finish going through the Bay Bridge, turn around and come back through the Bay Bridge the other way, drop me off at the hotel so I can watch my preseason 49er game, so I can watch my third string long snapper snap it to the fourth string punter and punt the ball. And a whole bunch of guys that never made the team, and we went 3-13 again anyway, so it really didn't matter. But I remember I sacrificed an hour of my mom's time so that I can have what I wanted. And what I wanted was so insignificant. In the grand scheme of things, a football team doesn't matter at all when it comes to the grand scheme of life, and especially when you compare it to spiritual things and things that are eternal. And sometimes we, especially myself, sometimes we place things that don't matter too high in our priorities. Sometimes we replace Jesus from the throne of our heart and put something else there that doesn't belong, and that's ephemeral, and that's not eternal, and that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of life. And I don't know about you, but I know that I am guilty of that. But today, we enter into the room, and to this room, we find this lady named Mary. And Mary is someone who did not have that problem. There was one thing that was on the throne of her heart. And it wasn't a sports team, and it wasn't a piece of jewelry, and it wasn't a status in her social life. The one thing that was on the throne of her heart was Jesus. And she was going to be willing to sacrifice and do whatever it took to make sure that Jesus knew that she loved him. And so we find this story, we find this room, we find Jesus coming into this room, this house of this man named Simon, and he's coming to a feast. And we've got to understand some of the context of the story to realize the significance and really understand what's going on. And so we have this feast. People are sitting down and they're really reclining on the floors, how they did it back then, and they were eating a feast. And a feast was a big deal back then. And at a feast, they would serve meat, and meat was something that was not eaten during every meal, only on special occasions. And so this was a big deal. This wasn't an everyday sort of a thing. And so Jesus was invited. He was the honored guest at this feast. And we have quite a few different people there. From other passages, we know that the apostles were there. We know that some other people were there. We know that Mary obviously was there, and her sister Martha also was there. But we find also an interesting thing. We find two other people that are there that shouldn't have been there. First of all, the person whose house it was Simon. And from verse number 3, we find that Simon was a leper. Well, back in the Bible days, lepers didn't have people over at their house. Lepers had to pronounce themselves unclean. They had to be ostracized, quarantined away from society. They didn't have contact with other people. So the fact that Simon the leper was having people over at his house and feasting with them and sitting with them during the same meal and having contact with them clearly indicates the fact that he no longer had leprosy, or else he would not be inviting people over to his house. So we find Simon in this house, the person who invited Jesus originally. And Simon is someone who had just been healed from his leprosy. We also find that Lazarus is in this house. And in John chapter 12, that's one of the chapters that tells this story. But in John chapter 11, that's when Lazarus was risen from the dead. So we find Simon and Lazarus, two men who shouldn't have been part of this feast. Lazarus should have been dead. And Simon should have been ostracized in another part of the society, maybe even not even alive because of the leprosy deteriorating on his body. And so we find two people that had just been healed, or that Jesus had done miracles in their life, and we find them there at the table. We'll come back and come back to that in a second. But we have this feast, and people are sitting and reclining and eating this meal and enjoying their time of fellowship and food. And in the middle of this feast, there comes this woman, Mary. And she interrupts their feast to put some oil on Jesus' forehead. And if you really think about that from an American perspective, you think, well, why would you interrupt a feast to put oil on someone's forehead? I mean, when you have a man eating a meal, you don't interrupt him, because that's not a time to interrupt him. I know that's not a time to interrupt me, because that's when I have food in front of my plate, that's the only thing in my life right now. Unless the Niner game's on, that's a little different. But we find Mary coming and interrupting this meal. It's interesting. You don't find Jesus telling Mary, "Hey, you can come after the meal. This is a special occasion. You can wait a little bit to pour your oil on my forehead." But no, Jesus said, this food, I don't care if it gets cold, this food can wait. Because what she's about to do, this act of worship and adoration and sacrifice, is much more important and significant and delightful to me than the greatest tasting delicacies the world has to offer. And Jesus is always more interested and more delighted in your worship, in your heart, and your devotion to him than anything else. Anything else is going on in the world. If we have a 4-year-old laying down on their knees praying to God, God is more interested in her prayers than anything else going on in the world, even a 49er game. I know it's hard to believe. And I can just imagine Jesus in heaven, and when someone comes to worship him, or comes to sing a song of praise, or comes to give a prayer request or a praise like we did a few minutes ago in church, I can just imagine Jesus kind of telling the angelic choir in heaven, stop singing for a second, because there's someone praying, there's someone singing, and their music, their voices are music to my ears. And Jesus is always more interested in our worship than anything else that's going on in this world. And so she comes and interrupts this feast, and she gets this box, and it's not what we would consider to be a box. It was really more of a kind of a bottle, and it was made out of alabaster, which is believed to come from a city in Egypt called Alabastron, and it was kind of like a ceramic type of a glass type of bottle. And so she had that, and this substance was known for its properties for preserving liquids. And so she used this box, and you would seal it to keep the corruption from coming into the box, so that whatever was stored inside would not be corrupted, would not be contaminated with anything else coming in from the air. And so she had this box, and the only way to open it was to break it. And so it was made out of this ceramic glass type of a substance called alabaster. And so she got a rock or a hammer or something, and she broke it in front of everybody, and she started to put this oil on his forehead. So why the oil? Why on the forehead? What's the significance behind that? Well, back then, in those days, people didn't have air conditioning, and they worked outside a lot, and they had feet that were covered in sandals and not socks and shoes, and they didn't take a shower every day. They didn't take baths every day. Taking a bath was kind of a every once in a while occasion. And so people had a lot of sweat, a lot of perspiration on their body. They would walk, they wouldn't drive in their car, miles, they would walk miles, and so they were always exposed to the sun, and so there was a lot of perspiration. And so a common tradition back then was if you had a guest come to your house, to help cover the odor of their perspiration, you would take some oil, some kind of perfume, some kind of sweet-smelling oil, and you would put it on their forehead or somewhere on their body that will help them smell good. It was kind of like putting perfume on someone, but it was very significant back then, and it was an act of hospitality that was just kind of the accepted norm back then during those days. And so partially that is what she's doing by when she puts that oil on his body. And so we find this lady breaking this box and doing this act of service and doing this act of love to Jesus Christ. And we find a lot of other people in that room. We find the apostles, we find in John chapter 12 that these are the ones who are having indignation with her. These are the ones that are mad at her and jealous of her and criticizing her for what she's doing, saying, why are you wasting this oil? That thing is worth a lot of money. Why are you pouring it out? You give it to the poor. And why are you interrupting the feast when we're sitting down at a meal? And she has the mindset that all this stuff doesn't matter because this is my last chance. Because we find in the very beginning of the passage that Jesus is about to be crucified. She knows this is her last chance to have a face-to-face interaction with Jesus before he goes to the cross. And so she's not going to waste her opportunity. She's going to come and pour everything that she has. She probably was a lady that didn't have much, but she had one thing, and that one thing happened to be this box of oil. And whatever it was, she just figured, whatever I have, the best thing that I have, I'm going to give it to Jesus. And that's why Jesus said she had done what she could. She didn't have much, but she did have that one thing. And I don't know what you have. I don't know what God wants from you, but we all have something that we can give Jesus in the area of our heart, in the area of our service, in the area of our possessions, or whatever it may be. And sometimes we don't have what other people have, and you think, well, I'm not as gifted as this person. I'm not called to preach. She wasn't called to preach either, but she did what she could, and that pleased Jesus, and that's all that mattered to her. So we have in this room quite a few different people, quite a plethora of groups of people. We have bystanders. We have we have Simon the leper, and we have Lazarus who had just been healed. If there's anyone that should have been pouring out their love to Jesus, it should have been them, because they shouldn't have been there. They shouldn't have been alive, and Simon should have been continuing to suffer in his leprosy, that's flesh-eating disease. And if you've seen a picture of it, it's hard to look at. And if anyone should have been loving on Jesus that day, I would think it would be Simon or Lazarus. If not them, then the apostles. I mean, they had spent 3.5 years traveling with him, preaching with him, hearing him pray, hearing him open up the scriptures and preach the word of God. They had spent so much time with him. They had known him on a personal level that nobody else did. But we find them criticizing Mary. They should have been encouraging her and saying, man, that's awesome that you did that. Thank you for doing that and encouraging me in my love for Christ. But instead, they have indignation on her. They have anger, and they're criticizing her and mocking her for this waste and this dumb, this act that she shouldn't have done. So we have bystanders, we have critics. And in the whole room, we only have one box breaker. And there are a lot of Christians in the world. There are a lot of followers of Christ. But there are few box breakers. There are a lot of people that are saved. There are a lot of people that go to church, but there are few Christians that are just sold out, lock, stock, and barrel. I'm going to do whatever you want, Jesus. Everything I have and everything I am is yours, and you can have my life and do with it whatever you want. There are many Christians, but there are few box breakers. Briefly, I'm going to to talk about 3 indications of a box breaker tonight, and I won't be long. 3 indications of a box breaker. First of all, the first indication of someone who is not just a Christian, not just a follower of Jesus Christ, but a genuine follower of Jesus Christ, a box breaker. The first indication is the fact that everybody knows that they love Jesus. Everybody knows they love Jesus. And I think of my life, I think of my high school days, and everybody in my high school, they may not have known my name, they may not have known me personally, but they knew that I was a Niner fan, because I would always wear my Niner jersey, and if it was cold, I was wearing my Niner jacket. Everybody knew that I liked the 49ers. And I look back at my high school years, and I think, man, shame on me. If there was one thing that people could know about me, I wouldn't want it to be that I like some dumb sports team. I want it to be that I love Jesus. I wish they can say, well, I don't know who he is, but I know that he loves Jesus because he's always passing out tracts, he's always praying before his meal, he's always respecting his teachers, and I wish that that was the testimony that I had, but it wasn't. If there's one thing someone knew about you, what would it be? Everybody knew that Mary loved Jesus. Why? Because she broke the box in front of everybody. She didn't do it in another secluded room with the door closed so nobody can hear it. She went out in the middle of the feast in front of everybody. And she broke that glass, and it shattered, and everybody heard it. In John chapter 12, verse 3, I won't have you turn there, but it said when she broke the box, the odor of the ointment filled the house. Everybody can hear it, and everybody can smell it. Everybody knew what was going on, and everybody knew that this lady, we don't know much about her, but we know that she loves Jesus. More than anything else, Jesus knew that she loved him. Verse number 8, it says, she hath done what she could. She has come beforehand to anoint my body to the burial. And I talked about how the fact that she was doing it as an act of hospitality to kind of take away the odor of his perspiration during that time, but also, more importantly, she was doing it in preparation for his burial. She knew that Jesus is about to go to the cross, and he's about to be crucified, and he's about to be buried, and she was doing another ritual back then, preparing his body for burial, to preserve the smell of his body as he lay in the grave. And I can just imagine as Jesus was on the cross, and the way that Roman soldiers would crucify people, they would position your body in such a way that your lungs were stretched out. They were stretched thin, so that in order to take a breath, you would have to lift your body up. You had to place all that pressure and use all the strength you had in your legs and your arms to lift your body up so that your lungs weren't stretched anymore and take a breath. And basically people would die of suffocation because their strength would give out. They wouldn't be able to lift their body up anymore, and they wouldn't be able to take another breath. So when you did lift your body up, you would take as deep of a breath as you could so that you would have longer before you had to take another breath. And I can just imagine as Jesus lifted his body, every time he lifted his body and took a breath and inhaled as big as he could, he would smell the odor that was on his body. In John chapter 12, it says that she didn't just put it on his forehead. She came down and she rubbed it on his feet, and she put it all over his body. She took that whole box and she poured it on his body. She took all that oil and put it on him. And as he was doused in that oil, no doubt he didn't take a bath between then and his crucifixion, because it was only a couple days later, a few days later, as he lay stretched out on that cross, and as he was thinking about other people mocking him and spitting on him, and even one of the thieves on the cross mocking him, and just people going around him and laughing at him, and the soldiers making fun of him, and as he looked 2,000 years in the future and saw us sinning against him, at least he knew that there's somebody that loved him back. Jesus knew that Mary loved him. Everybody knew that Mary loved Jesus. We don't know too much about Mary. We do find her in a few different passages in the Bible, but we don't really know as much about her as we know about John and Peter and some of the other apostles we find in the Bible. But we do know one thing, that she loved Jesus. Everybody knows that they love Jesus. Number 2, the second indication of a box breaker is the fact that sacrifice is no problem for them. Sacrifice is not a problem. It wasn't a problem for Mary. She didn't think, should I really pour the whole thing? Should I just kind of pour part of it? Should I find some other cheaper kind of a perfume I can put on his body? She said, no, I'm going to get this expensive perfume. I'm going to pour it all out on his body. The common tradition back then was to put 2 or 3 drops, but she put the whole box on him. She poured everything that she had out on him because he was everything to her. That box was worth 300 pence, which was basically a pence was a day's labor. So if you basically took every penny you earned for a whole year, that's how much this box was worth. In our modern vernacular, somewhere around $35,000 is what this box would be worth. And she didn't hesitate. It wasn't an issue. It wasn't something she had to think about. She knew, this is my last chance to show Jesus I love him. Everything I have. She's probably all that she did have. She poured it out for him because she was the love of his life. Sacrifice was not a problem for Mary. I think of David Livingstone, famous missionary to Africa. He's one of my favorite missionaries, mainly because he went to Africa. But he was a great missionary. He went through a lot of trials, a lot of tribulations during his time there. He was attacked by a lion, and his arm was messed up for the rest of his life from that attack. His wife died at a young age of yellow fever. He suffered from malnutrition. Because of that, his teeth, many of his teeth fell out. He suffered from starvation, and in order to survive, he ate tree roots. He was basically a dead man walking for a lot of his ministry, and sometimes people would even have to carry him from one place to another. He contracted a lot of diseases during his time in Africa, including yellow fever, malaria, and leprosy, and actually spent most of his ministry with one of those diseases, beating against, really struggling with one of those diseases from time to time on his body. And he said, when someone asked him about the sacrifice that he made in Africa, this was his response. He said, for my own part, I have never ceased to rejoice that God has appointed me to such an office. People talk of the sacrifice that I've made in spending so much of my life in Africa. Is that a sacrifice which brings its own blessed reward in healthful activity, the consciousness of doing good, peace of mind, and the bright hope of a glorious destiny hereafter? Away with the word sacrifice. Say rather it is a privilege. Anxiety, sickness, suffering, or danger now and then, with the foregoing of the common conveniences and charities of this life, may make us pause and cause the spirit to waver and the soul to sink, but let this only be for a moment. All these are nothing when compared with the glory which shall be revealed in and for us. I never made a sacrifice. David Livingstone took the word sacrifice out of his dictionary because he knew that in comparison to what Jesus had done for him, there was nothing he could ever do that would actually fit the description of what that word means. And it wasn't a problem for him because he was in love with Jesus and he was a box breaker. So number one, the first indication of a box breaker is the fact that everybody knows that they love Jesus. Number two is the fact that sacrifice is no problem for them. But number three, lastly tonight, the third indication of a box breaker is the fact that they value God's approval over the world's. They value God's approval over the world's. I think of Mary, she was the most unpopular person in that room. She should have been the most popular besides Jesus. She should have been paraded. She should have been praised and encouraged. But she was hated, and she was mocked, and she was ridiculed. But it didn't really matter to her because there was only one person she was trying to please. She was willing to put herself out there and pour out her reputation and pour out her substance and even pour out her dignity. The Bible says that she took the hair on her head and got on her knees and rubbed the oil onto his feet with her hair. She took the most precious part of her body and used it to wipe the filthiest part of his. She didn't care about her reputation, and she didn't care about her dignity. She poured everything that she had out in front of Jesus, and because of that, she was hated. Because of that, she endured some persecution. But the only person's approval that she cared about was that of her soon-to-be Savior. And she didn't mind looking like a fool to the rest of the people in that room because she knew that Jesus was pleased, and that's ultimately all that she wanted. I think of when I first graduated from Bible college, I didn't go right into full-time ministry, and I worked secular jobs for a few years, and one of the jobs I did was Uber. And I'm sure you guys probably have some Uber out here. It's really big in LA, and so I live in Lancaster. I commuted to LA to do Uber. I would never recommend commuting to do a driving job. It's just a lot of driving, and it's just, after taxes, it came out to like under minimum wage. I wouldn't recommend it, but it was what I did during the time. And I would go to LA, and every little nook and cranny LA you can think of, Compton and Watts, the bad parts, and you think of Beverly Hills and Bel Air and Santa Monica, every little spot in LA you can think of. I've basically been there picking people up. and dropping them off. And sometimes picking them right back up and dropping them off again, depending on wherever they were doing that day. But I'll never forget the day I went and picked up a couple team guys from this school that I had never heard of. And I'd never seen it, and I kind of came into this neighborhood, and all of a sudden down this little hill, there was this immaculate, beautiful looking school. And I found that it was called Harvard Westlake. And it's basically a prodigious academy, and people spend $52,000 a year to put their kids in that school in hopes of them getting into a good college because of the good education they're going to get and the faculty to student ratio and things like that. And so I picked some team guys up and I went to go drop them off at their house. And I was kind of listening to the conversation. They kind of included me in the conversation a little bit. And I remember college came up, and they were talking about the school they were trying to get into. And I remember one of them saying, "Man, I'm trying to get into UC Berkeley." And they said, "What school did you go to?" And I said, "Well, that's where I went. I went to UC Berkeley." And then I just remember him thinking, like, "Man, that's amazing. Like, that's the school I'm trying to get into. That's the school my dad. That's the school that my dad went to." And then I went and dropped him off at his dad's house, and I saw the mansion, and I saw the street, and I saw all the cars, and if you had a Mercedes, you were a low-ranking member of that street. It was just a very immaculate place, and Brentwood, a lot of celebrities in the general vicinity, nice view, right, pretty close to the beach. And I remember driving there and dropping them off, and I remember the devil kind of getting on my shoulder and saying, "They're spending $52,000 a year to try to get their kids into the school that you got into." And their dad went to that school, and look at what he has. Look at his house, and look at the car, and look at the driveway, look at the gate, and your Toyota's not even worthy of driving on the asphalt in the street. Look what he has, and look what you could have had. And I remember I got discouraged a little bit that day, thinking, man, I quit Berkeley. I did it for a year, and I quit to go to Bible college, and now I'm dropping people off at different parts of LA, and I'm making under minimum wage, and man, this isn't fair. Look at what I could have had over there. I remember the Holy Spirit getting back on my shoulder and kind of kicking the devil off, and I was driving home that night and said, he's going to try to tempt you with all these things that you could have had, but just wait and see what I have for you in heaven. And just wait to see the rewards that I have for you. And by the way, when you live for God and when you break the box and when you give everything you have to Jesus, He will always reward you. As we see in verse number 9, the reward that Mary got. Verse number 9 says, "Verily I say unto you," Jesus speaking, "wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, this also that she hath done shall be spoken of for a memorial of her." And I really believe what Jesus is saying is He's saying, you guys are criticizing her, but you don't understand the significance of what she's doing. And yes, some of you will go on and you'll write different parts of the Bible. John, you're going to write 5 books, and Peter, you're going to write 2 books. But I'm going to make sure that what she just did gets recorded in my word. Now I'm going to make sure that it gets recorded not just once, not just twice, but 3 times, so that wherever this gospel is preached, wherever someone comes in and takes the Bible and translates it into their language, wherever, any corner in the world, wherever this Bible is preached, this story is going to be told. And people are going to think highly of her because this story is going to be told for a memorial of her. And I'm sure every time probably not every time, because she probably gets bored sometimes, but probably a lot of times when someone's preaching from this passage on a given Sunday or a Wednesday night like tonight, she's probably looking over the gates of heaven, if you will, proverbially speaking, and saying, man, they're using my story again. I've been in heaven for 2,000 years, but God's still using me on earth. And those are the kind of rewards that you get when you pour out your life to Jesus. When you're not just kind of a bystander, you're not just kind of an average, mediocre Christian, but when you're one of those lock, stock, and barrel, I don't care what Jesus takes from me or what He causes me to give or what He causes me to do. I'm His and He is mine. And those are the kind of rewards that those kind of Christians, those box-breaking Christians get. And I remember thinking that night, yeah, that's a nice house and that's a nice mansion. But one day I'm going to get to heaven, and there's going to be all these thousands of African faces that are going to come to me and say, thank you for coming to Nigeria. I'm here because you came to my country. I'll take that over the mansion in Beverly Hills any day. by the way, the mansion I'm not gonna have to pay for property taxes. I'm not gonna have to pay for oil changes on my car. I'm not gonna have to pay mortgage or anything like that.
Streets
it's gonna
of
be
gold.
exactly, and it's not gonna deteriorate after 50 years.
And a Volkswagen.
And a Volkswagen. Well, I don't know about that one, but we'll see. But I'm excited about the rewards of heaven. And I don't know what's in your box tonight. I know for me, it was hard getting rid of what was in my box, because several years ago, 2010, that was 9 years ago, I guess, just doing some math there. God told me, I want you to change directions.
Okay.
I want you to stop the course you're on right now. I want you to withdraw from your college. I want you to not go into business. I want you to go to the ministry.
Okay.
I remember that moment was one of the most difficult, but one of the most exciting and liberating moments in my life. And as God was calling me to make a 180-degree turn. And reluctantly and fearfully, but excitedly, I broke the box and said, Lord, my life, my future is yours. And I've never regretted it. And whatever is in your box, whether it be a possession, whether it be monetary, whether it be your life, or whatever, your future, or maybe it's your heart, maybe there's something in your heart. God is saying, I don't have that area of your heart yet. I don't know what's in your box tonight, but I can guarantee you that you'll never regret giving it to Jesus.
Amen.
Let's break the box tonight. Brother John.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.